Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This question, Secretary Munucin, this question goes to de-risking the federal balance sheet, and specifically, we discussed this the last time that you and I spoke before you, when you were before the committee, and also in conjunction with GSE reform. But I'll lay out the case here. Earlier this Congress, I introduced legislation requiring that the GSEs increase credit risk transfers with the private sector. And I'm hopeful that the bill will be included in the committee's comprehensive reform efforts. So we have seen credit risk transfers work, not just at Fannie and Freddie, but following last year's storm season. If we think about it, we saw a private reinsurance payout afterwards of $1 billion to the National Flood Insurance Program. So analysis has shown that there is far more capacity in the financial system worldwide, about $600 billion, for increased credit risk transfer. So my thought here is, why not look elsewhere in the federal government? On the housing front, why not replicate risk transfer at FHA and at Ginnie Mae specifically? And I would ask if you would support those efforts.
Well, first of all, let me just say I look forward to working with you and the chairman and others on a bipartisan basis for housing reform. I think this is very important. And I do say housing reform because I do think we need to look at FHA and not just the GSEs. I want to be very careful that we don't solve the taxpayer issue in one area only to find out that the market share at FHA has gone way up and we have taxpayers' risk on the Fed balance sheet.
Absolutely. So what I plan to do is to introduce legislation to direct the Office of Management and Budget to identify other areas of the federal balance sheet where de-risking could be used to protect taxpayers, and I hope you could support that effort. Also on export control reform, a point I was going to make is that as we discuss our economic security here moving forward, I share the concern of my colleagues that foreign government-backed investments that's critical, that we look at those investments in U.S. technologies that might pose a national security risk. And as you mentioned in your opening, the committee is considering legislation to expand CFIUS in a way to address this threat. The Foreign Affairs Committee, which I chair, is considering export control reform as an additional way to tackle the problem. So would you support new authorities to restrict the export of critical technologies to countries that threaten the U.S. national security?
I absolutely would. Thank you.
Well, thank you. With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.